A cop named Daniel secretly follows a lonely black woman, Angela, through the city's dark streets, convinced she's hiding something dangerous. Moments later, he bursts into tears when he realizes the truth is nothing like he expected. What is this shocking revelation, and how will it change both their lives? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today, and if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. Daniel Harris stood at his usual spot on the corner of Main and Oak, his eyes scanning the quiet streets. The streetlights cast a soft glow on the empty sidewalks, their steady hum the only sound breaking the night's silence. It was just another late shift for Officer Harris. As the clock struck midnight, a figure caught his attention. A woman, her shoulders hunched and her steps hurried, made her way down the street. Daniel's brow furrowed as he watched her approach. Something about her seemed off. The woman's clothes were wrinkled and worn, hanging loosely on her thin frame. Her hair was messy, pulled back in a hasty ponytail. But what really caught Daniel's eye was the large, bulging backpack she carried. It looked heavy, weighing her down as she walked. "Ma'am?" Daniel called out as she passed by. The woman flinched, her eyes darting up to meet his for just a second before quickly looking away. In that brief moment, Daniel saw fear and exhaustion etched on her face. "Everything all right?" he asked, his voice softer now. The woman nodded quickly, mumbling a quiet, "Yes, officer," before picking up her pace. Daniel watched her go, a nagging feeling in his gut. Why was she out so late? What was in that backpack? And why did she look so desperate? He couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Years on the force had honed his instincts, and right now, they were telling him to pay attention. "I'd better keep an eye on her," Daniel thought to himself. He decided to follow her, keeping a respectful distance. As he walked, his mind raced with possibilities. Was she involved in something illegal? Or was she running from something or someone? Daniel's heart felt heavy. He'd seen too many cases where appearances were deceiving, but he couldn't ignore his duty. If something was wrong, he needed to find out what it was. Over the next few days, Daniel found himself increasingly preoccupied with the mysterious woman. Her late-night appearances became a pattern, and each time he saw her, his concern grew. On Tuesday night, he spotted her again. She was walking quickly, her eyes fixed on the ground. Daniel noticed how she hugged the walls of buildings, staying in the shadows as if trying to avoid being seen. "There she is again," Daniel muttered to himself. He watched as she crossed the street, her backpack looking just as heavy as before. When a group of late-night revelers passed by, laughing loudly, the woman visibly flinched. She pressed herself against a nearby wall, waiting for them to pass before continuing on her way. Thursday brought another sighting. This time, Daniel was patrolling in his squad car when he saw her. She was standing at a bus stop, fidgeting nervously. As the bus approached, she seemed to hesitate, then turned and walked away quickly, disappearing down a side street. Daniel's suspicions deepened with each encounter. Why was she always alone? Why did she seem so scared? And what was she carrying in that backpack? Unable to shake his concerns, Daniel decided to dig deeper. On Friday morning, he sat at his desk at the precinct, his coffee growing cold as he focused on his computer screen. "Okay, let's see what we can find out about you," he murmured, typing in the description of the woman into the police database. He didn't have a name, but he hoped her distinctive appearance might yield some results. Hours passed as Daniel combed through records and reports. He reached out to contacts, asking if anyone had seen a woman matching her description. By the end of his shift, he had a small pile of notes, but no concrete answers. As he drove home that evening, Daniel's mind was racing. Was she involved in drugs, theft, or was it something even more sinister? The more he thought about it, the more convinced he became that something illegal was going on. "I've got to figure this out," Daniel said to himself, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. "Whatever she's mixed up in, I need to get to the bottom of it." As the days passed, Daniel's obsession with uncovering the truth about Angela grew. He spent countless hours poring over records, making phone calls, and following up on every lead he could find. But despite his best efforts, the mysterious woman remained an enigma. One afternoon, Daniel sat at his desk, rubbing his tired eyes. The computer screen in front of him displayed yet another dead end. He had searched every database he had access to, but Angela Walker seemed to be a ghost. "This doesn't make any sense," he muttered to himself. "Everyone leaves a trace." Daniel leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. He had found no criminal record for Angela, which should have been reassuring. But instead, it only made him more suspicious. How could someone exist in this day and age without leaving any digital footprint? Even more puzzling was the complete lack of family or close connections. No parents, no siblings, no friends that he could find. It was as if Angela had appeared out of thin air. As he stared at the ceiling, a troubling thought began to form in Daniel's mind. What if Angela Walker wasn't her real name? What if she was using a fake identity to cover up a darker past? The idea took root, and Daniel found himself unable to shake it. He began to imagine all sorts of scenarios. Maybe she was on the run from the law, or perhaps she was involved in some kind of criminal organization that had erased her past. Daniel's determination to uncover the truth intensified. He felt a responsibility to get to the bottom of this mystery, not just as a cop, but as someone who cared about the safety of his community. "I'm going to figure out who you really are, Angela Walker," Daniel said softly, his eyes narrowing as he turned back to his computer. "Whatever you're hiding, I'll find it." As night fell over the city, Daniel found himself once again on patrol, his eyes scanning the darkened streets. His heart skipped a beat when he spotted a familiar figure standing near a closed storefront. It was Angela, her thin frame hunched against the chill night air. Daniel slowed his patrol car, pulling over to the curb a safe distance away. He watched as Angela glanced around nervously, her eyes darting from side to side. The streetlights cast long shadows across her face, deepening the hollows of her cheeks. "What are you up to?" Daniel muttered under his breath, his fingers tightening on the steering wheel. He was convinced that this was the moment he'd been waiting for. Angela's behavior screamed of someone about to commit a crime. The closed store, the late hour, her obvious anxiety. It all added up in Daniel's mind. Quietly, he stepped out of his car, careful not to let the door slam. He moved into the shadows, his heart pounding in his chest. Years of training kicked in as he crept closer, using parked cars and street fixtures for cover. Angela remained oblivious to his presence, her attention focused on the store's entrance. Daniel's pulse quickened as he watched her reach into her tattered coat pocket. Was she pulling out a tool to break in? A weapon? The tension in the air was palpable. Daniel's breath came in short, controlled bursts as he prepared to spring into action. He was so close now, he could almost hear Angela's ragged breathing. Time seemed to slow down as Daniel waited, every muscle in his body coiled and ready. He was certain that any moment now Angela would make her move. And when she did, he'd be there to catch her red-handed. Angela suddenly turned away from the store, her movements quick and furtive. She glanced over her shoulder before hurrying down the sidewalk, her worn shoes barely making a sound on the concrete. Daniel's heart raced as he watched her slip into a dark alley. This is it, he thought, his suspicions reaching a fever pitch. He was sure she was leading him to some hidden criminal activity. Keeping to the shadows, Daniel followed Angela into the alley. The narrow passage was deserted, lit only by the faint glow of a distant streetlight. The smell of garbage and damp concrete filled the air. Daniel's every sense was on high alert as he crept forward, his hand instinctively hovering near his holster. Angela's figure was barely visible in the gloom. She moved with purpose, her steps quick and determined. Daniel's mind raced with possibilities. Was she meeting someone? Retrieving hidden contraband? His years of experience told him something big was about to happen. The alley seemed to stretch on forever. Daniel's breath came in short, controlled bursts as he carefully placed each foot, avoiding loose debris that might give away his presence. The walls of the buildings on either side loomed over them, creating an oppressive atmosphere that only heightened the tension. As they ventured deeper into the alley, Daniel's suspicions grew with each passing moment. He was ready to intervene at any second, his body tense and primed for action. The silence was broken only by the distant sounds of traffic and the occasional scurrying of a rat. Angela paused for a moment, looking around cautiously. Daniel froze, pressing himself against the rough brick wall. His heart pounded so loudly in his ears that he was sure she must hear it. But Angela didn't seem to notice him. After a brief moment, she continued on her way, moving deeper into the shadows. Daniel took a deep breath and followed, his resolve strengthening. He was convinced that whatever lay at the end of this alley would prove his suspicions right. With each step, he prepared himself for what he might find, ready to face whatever criminal activity Angela was involved in. Angela's path led her deeper into the city's underbelly, where the streets grew narrower and the buildings more dilapidated. Daniel hesitated for a moment, his instincts warning him of the dangers that lurked in this forgotten part of town. But his sense of duty pushed him forward, compelling him to uncover the truth about the mysterious woman he'd been tracking. The air grew thick with the stench of rotting garbage and stale urine. Graffiti-covered walls loomed on either side, their once vibrant colors now faded and peeling. Daniel's footsteps echoed softly off the crumbling bricks as he carefully maneuvered around potholes and discarded trash. Angela moved with purpose, her shoulders hunched and her head down. She seemed to know exactly where she was going, which only heightened Daniel's suspicions. He watched as she skirted around a group of homeless men huddled around a burning trash can, their faces gaunt and hopeless in the flickering light. As they ventured further into this desolate area, Daniel's unease grew. He'd rarely patrolled this part of the city, and never alone. The weight of his gun at his hip offered little comfort, as shadows seemed to dance at the edges of his vision. Still, he pressed on, driven by the certainty that he was on the verge of uncovering something big. Suddenly, Angela came to a stop in front of an old, run-down building. Its windows were boarded up, and the faded sign above the door was unreadable. Daniel's heart raced as he watched her glance furtively up and down the street before approaching the entrance. This was it. This had to be the moment he'd been waiting for. Daniel's muscles tensed, ready for action. He was certain that behind those weathered doors lay the answers to all his questions about Angela. Whatever criminal activities she was involved in, he was about to uncover the truth. Daniel's heart raced as he watched Angela hesitate at the door of the abandoned building. She cast nervous glances over her shoulder, her eyes darting up and down the deserted street. In that moment, Daniel saw fear etched across her face, a raw vulnerability that made him pause. But his training kicked in, pushing aside any doubts. He had to act now. Taking a deep breath, Daniel stepped out of the shadows. His hand instinctively moved to rest on his holstered gun as he approached the building. The crunch of broken glass under his feet seemed deafening in the eerie silence of the night. As he neared the entrance, Daniel's mind raced through possible scenarios. What would he find inside? Drug dealers? A human trafficking ring? His imagination conjured up images of hardened criminals and dangerous confrontations. He steeled himself, knowing that whatever lay beyond that door, he had to be prepared for anything. The old building loomed before him, its boarded-up windows like empty eyes staring down at him. Paint peeled from the walls in long strips, revealing the decaying bricks underneath. The stench of mold and decay hung heavy in the air, making Daniel wrinkle his nose in disgust. With trembling fingers, Daniel reached for the door handle. It was cool to the touch, sending a shiver down his spine. He took another deep breath, trying to calm his nerves. Years of training had prepared him for moments like this, but the adrenaline coursing through his veins made it hard to think clearly. Slowly, carefully, he turned the handle. The door creaked open, the sound echoing ominously in the empty street. Daniel winced, hoping the noise hadn't alerted anyone inside to his presence. He peered into the darkness beyond, straining his eyes to make out any shapes or movement. As he stepped over the threshold, the floorboards groaned under his weight. Daniel froze, listening intently for any sign that he'd been heard. His hand tightened on his gun, ready to draw it at a moment's notice. The darkness pressed in around him, thick and oppressive, hiding whatever dangers might be lurking within. Daniel crept through the darkened hallway, his footsteps barely audible on the dusty floor. The musty smell of decay filled his nostrils as he moved deeper into the abandoned building. His eyes, now adjusted to the dim light, scanned every shadow for potential threats. Ahead, he could make out Angela's silhouette as she moved with purpose through the gloom. Daniel's heart pounded in his chest, each beat echoing in his ears. He gripped his gun tighter, ready to draw it at a moment's notice. As they descended a creaky staircase, Daniel heard faint voices drifting up from below. The muffled sounds grew louder with each step, and he could feel the tension in his body rising. His mind raced with possibilities of what he might find. A drug den, a hideout for fugitives, or something even worse. At the bottom of the stairs, Angela paused before a door that emitted a soft glow around its edges. Daniel held his breath as she pushed it open and stepped inside. He inched closer, straining to hear what was happening beyond the threshold. What he saw when he peered into the room stopped him dead in his tracks. His jaw dropped, and for a moment, he forgot to breathe. The scene before him was nothing like he had imagined. Instead of hardened criminals or dangerous activity, he saw something that shook him to his core. The room was dimly lit by a few candles, casting a warm glow over a makeshift living space. In one corner, two small children huddled together on a worn mattress, their eyes wide with a mixture of fear and curiosity as they looked up at Angela. Scattered around were a few tattered blankets, some threadbare clothes, and a small collection of canned food. Angela knelt beside the children, her face a mask of love and worry as she pulled them into a tight embrace. "I'm sorry I was gone so long," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "But I'm here now. Everything's going to be okay." Daniel stood frozen in the doorway, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. Angela wasn't a criminal. She was a homeless mother, desperately trying to care for her children in impossible circumstances. Daniel stood frozen in the doorway, his mind reeling from the scene before him. The small, makeshift room was a far cry from the criminal hideout he had imagined. Instead, it was a humble shelter for a desperate mother and her two young children. Angela's head snapped up at Daniel's presence, her eyes widening with fear. She instinctively pulled her children closer, her body trembling. "Please," she whispered, her voice cracking with emotion. "Please don't take my babies away. I'm doing the best I can." Daniel's heart clenched at the raw desperation in her voice. He slowly raised his hands, showing he meant no harm. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said softly, his own voice thick with emotion. Angela's eyes filled with tears as she looked at her children, then back at Daniel. "I had to leave," she explained, her words tumbling out in a rush. "My husband, he was abusive. I couldn't let my kids grow up like that. We had nowhere else to go." As Angela spoke, Daniel felt a wave of shame wash over him. He had been so quick to judge, so certain of his suspicions, but the truth was far more heartbreaking than anything he had imagined. "I was too ashamed to ask for help," Angela continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "I thought I could figure it out on my own, but it's been so hard." Daniel's vision blurred as tears welled up in his eyes. He saw the love in Angela's eyes as she looked at her children, the determination that had kept her going through unimaginable hardship. He thought of the courage it must have taken to flee an abusive relationship, to choose an uncertain future over a dangerous present. Overwhelmed by the weight of his misjudgment and the depth of Angela's sacrifice, Daniel felt his composure crumble. Tears streamed down his face as he realized how terribly wrong he had been. He had let his biases cloud his judgment, seeing a threat where there was only a mother's love and desperate struggle for survival. "I'm so sorry," Daniel choked out, his voice thick with regret and compassion. "I'm so sorry." Daniel's tears continued to fall as he took a deep, shaky breath. He slowly approached Angela, his hand still raised to show he meant no harm. "I'm not going to take your children," he said softly, his voice filled with sincerity. "I'm here to help, not hurt you." Angela's shoulders sagged with relief, but her eyes remained wary. Daniel knelt down a few feet away from her, trying to appear less intimidating. "Can you tell me more about what happened?" he asked gently. Angela hesitated for a moment, then nodded. As she began to speak, her voice trembled with emotion. "It started small," she said, her eyes distant. "Harsh words, then pushing. But it got worse. I was scared every day, wondering what would set him off. Daniel listened intently, his heart aching for Angela and her children. He watched as she pulled her kids closer, drawing strength from their presence. The night I left, Angela's voice broke. She took a deep breath before continuing. He threatened the kids. I knew then I had to get out, no matter what. Daniel nodded, understanding the immense courage it must have taken to make that decision. You did the right thing, he said softly. You protected your children. Angela's eyes filled with fresh tears. But look at us now, she whispered. Living in this, I feel like I've failed them. Daniel shook his head emphatically. No, Angela, you haven't failed. You've been incredibly brave and strong. What you did took immense courage. He leaned forward slightly, his eyes meeting Angela's. I promise you, I'm going to do everything I can to help you and your children. You don't have to face this alone anymore. As Daniel spoke these words, he felt a profound shift within himself. The suspicion and judgment that had driven him to follow Angela melted away, replaced by a deep sense of compassion and a burning desire to help. He no longer saw a suspect, but a resilient mother who had risked everything to protect her family. Daniel's heart swelled with determination as he pulled out his phone. His fingers moved swiftly across the screen, searching for local shelters and charities that could help Angela and her children. He made call after call, his voice filled with urgency as he explained the situation to each organization. After several attempts, Daniel's face lit up. I've found a place, he said softly, looking at Angela with hope in his eyes. There's a shelter downtown that can take you in tonight. They have beds, food, and even some counseling services. Angela's eyes widened, a mix of relief and fear crossing her face. She pulled her children closer, her body tense. I don't know, she whispered, her voice shaking. What if they judge us? What if they try to take my kids away? Daniel could see the panic rising in Angela's eyes. He moved closer, his voice gentle but firm. Angela, I promise you that won't happen. This shelter specializes in helping families like yours. They understand what you've been through. He reached out, carefully placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. And I'll be right there with you, every step of the way. I won't let anyone separate you from your children. Angela looked at Daniel, searching his face for any sign of deception. Finding only sincerity, she slowly nodded. Okay, she said quietly. We'll go. Daniel smiled warmly, relief washing over him. That's great, Angela. You're making the right choice. Let's get you and the kids packed up. As they gathered Angela's meager belongings, Daniel couldn't help but feel a mix of sadness and hope. He watched as Angela gently woke her sleeping children, explaining in hushed tones that they were going to a safer place. With gentle encouragement from Daniel, Angela gathered her children and their few belongings. The small family followed the officer out of the abandoned building and into the cool night air. Daniel led them to his patrol car, carefully helping Angela settle her sleepy kids in the back seat. As they drove through the quiet streets, Daniel glanced at Angela in the rearview mirror. Her face was etched with worry, but there was a glimmer of hope in her eyes. He marveled at her strength, thinking about all she had endured to keep her children safe. They arrived at the shelter, a modest building with warm yellow light spilling from its windows. Daniel parked and turned to Angela with a reassuring smile. We're here. Are you ready? Angela nodded, taking a deep breath. As ready as I'll ever be, she said softly. Together, they helped the children out of the car. The little ones clung to their mother, eyes wide as they took in their new surroundings. Daniel led the way to the entrance, holding the door open for the family. Inside, they were greeted by a kind-faced woman with graying hair. Welcome, she said warmly. I'm Susan, the night manager. You must be Angela and her little ones. Angela nodded, her grip on her children's hands tightening slightly. Daniel stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on Angela's shoulder. Yes, this is Angela and her kids. They've been through a lot and need a safe place to stay. Susan's eyes softened with understanding. Of course, We're here to help. Let's get you settled in and find you something to eat. You all must be hungry." As they followed Susan down a hallway, the aroma of warm food filled the air. Angela's youngest child perked up, tugging on her mother's sleeve. "Mommy, I smell soup." For the first time since Daniel had met her, Angela's face relaxed into a small smile. "Yes, sweetie. We're going to have a nice warm meal." They entered a cozy dining area where a few other residents were finishing their late dinners. Susan showed them to a table and brought over bowls of steaming soup and fresh bread. Daniel watched as Angela helped her children settle in, making sure they were comfortable before she sat down herself. As the family began to eat, Daniel stood nearby, his heart full of emotion. He was struck by how resilient Angela had been, surviving on the streets while protecting her children. Despite everything she had been through, here she was, caring for her kids with unwavering love and devotion. The next morning, Daniel arrived at the shelter bright and early. He found Angela and her children in the dining area, finishing up a simple breakfast of oatmeal and fruit. The kids looked more rested, their faces brighter than the night before. "Good morning," Daniel greeted them warmly. "How did you all sleep?" Angela gave him a small smile. "Better than we have in a long time. Thank you, Officer Harris." Daniel nodded, his heart lifting at the sight of their improved spirits. "I'm glad to hear that. Listen, I know a place that might be able to help you get back on your feet. Would you be willing to come with me?" Angela hesitated, her eyes flickering with uncertainty. I don't know. What kind of place?" "It's a charity that helps women in situations like yours," Daniel explained gently. "They offer all sorts of resources, legal advice, counseling, job training. I think it could really make a difference for you and your kids." After a moment of consideration, Angela nodded. "Okay, we'll go." They made arrangements for the children to stay at the shelter's daycare, and soon Daniel and Angela were on their way. As they drove, Daniel could sense Angela's nervousness. "It's going to be all right," he assured her. "These people are here to help, not judge." When they arrived at the charity's office, a kind-faced woman named Linda greeted them. She led them to a cozy room with comfortable chairs and warm lighting. "Angela," Linda said softly, "can you tell me a little about your situation?" At first, Angela's words came haltingly, but as Linda listened with patience and empathy, Angela began to open up. She spoke of her abusive husband, the fear that had driven her to flee with her children, and the shame that had kept her from seeking help sooner. "I was so afraid," Angela admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Afraid of being judged, afraid of losing my kids. I thought I could handle it on my own, but—" Linda reached out and gently squeezed Angela's hand. "You've been incredibly brave, Angela. What you did to protect your children took immense courage. Now let us help you build a better future for your family." As Linda explained the various services the charity offered, Daniel watched hope slowly bloom in Angela's eyes. For the first time in a long while, she began to see a path forward. Over the next few weeks, Daniel made it a point to visit Angela and her children at the shelter regularly. Each time he arrived, he brought small gifts, coloring books for the kids, a warm scarf for Angela, or sometimes just a bag of fresh fruit. These simple gestures meant the world to the little family. One evening, as the children played nearby, Angela and Daniel sat on a bench in the shelter's small courtyard. The setting sun cast a warm glow over them, and for the first time, Angela seemed truly relaxed in Daniel's presence. "You know," she said softly, "I never thought I'd trust a cop again. But you're different, Daniel." Daniel felt a lump form in his throat. "I'm just doing what's right, Angela. You and your kids deserve so much better than what life's handed you." Angela nodded, her eyes distant. "It wasn't always bad, you know. When I first met John, he was charming, kind. But after we got married, things changed." As Angela spoke, Daniel listened intently. She shared stories of the abuse she had endured, the verbal attacks that chipped away at her self-esteem, the physical violence that left her bruised and terrified. She described the night she finally decided to leave, how she had waited until John was asleep before grabbing the kids and running. "I was so scared," Angela admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I thought he might find us, drag us back. That's why I couldn't ask for help. I was sure someone would recognize us, tell him where we were." Daniel's heart ached as he listened. He thought about how close he had come to misunderstanding Angela completely, how his initial suspicions could have led to tragedy instead of hope. "Angela," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I want you to know that you're safe now. I promise you, I'll do everything in my power to make sure you and your kids get the fresh start you deserve." Angela's eyes welled up with tears, and she nodded gratefully. In that moment, Daniel felt a renewed sense of purpose. He knew that helping Angela rebuild her life was more than just his duty as a police officer. It was a calling, a chance to make a real difference in the world. As the days turned into weeks, Angela began attending counseling sessions provided by the charity. At first, she was hesitant, her eyes darting nervously around the room as she sat across from the kind-faced therapist. But slowly, with each session, Angela's tense shoulders began to relax, and her voice grew stronger. Daniel noticed the change in Angela. Her smile, once rare and fleeting, now appeared more often. She stood a little taller, spoke with more confidence. It warmed his heart to see her progress, to witness her slowly reclaiming her life. One afternoon, as Daniel waited to drive Angela home from her session, he found himself deep in thought. He watched as people bustled by on the busy street, wondering how many of them might be silently struggling like Angela had been. "There must be so many more out there," he murmured to himself, his brow furrowed with concern. As Angela emerged from the building, her face noticeably brighter, Daniel felt a surge of pride and fulfillment. He had played a part in this transformation, in giving Angela and her children a chance at a better life. On the drive back to the shelter, Angela spoke animatedly about her session, sharing insights she had gained. Daniel listened intently, his mind racing with ideas. "You know, Angela," he said during a lull in the conversation, "seeing how much these sessions have helped you, it's got me thinking." "About what?" Angela asked, curiosity in her voice. Daniel tapped the steering wheel thoughtfully. "About how many other people there might be out there, going through what you did. People who need help, but don't know where to turn." Angela nodded solemnly. "There are so many, Daniel. When we were on the streets, I saw them. Families, single mothers, all trying to survive." Daniel felt a renewed sense of purpose stirring within him. He realized that his experience with Angela had opened his eyes to a world he'd barely noticed before. Now that he saw it, he couldn't look away. The next day, Angela's hands trembled as she held the application form for the job training program. She sat at a small table in the shelter's common area, her pen hovering over the paper. Daniel watched her from across the table, his eyes filled with encouragement. "You can do this, Angela," he said softly. "Just take it one question at a time." Angela took a deep breath and nodded. She began to fill out the form, her handwriting shaky at first, but growing steadier with each line. As she worked, Daniel noticed the determined set of her jaw, the same fierce look he'd seen when she protected her children. "What if they don't accept me?" Angela whispered, her voice barely audible. "What if I'm not good enough?" Daniel leaned forward, his eyes meeting hers. "You are more than good enough, Angela. You're one of the strongest people I've ever met. This program would be lucky to have you." A small smile tugged at Angela's lips, and she returned to the application with renewed vigor. As she completed each section, Daniel offered gentle guidance, helping her showcase her strengths and experiences. Over the next few days, Daniel visited Angela regularly, helping her prepare for the program. They practiced interview questions, with Daniel playing the role of the interviewer. At first, Angela's responses were hesitant and brief, but with Daniel's patient coaching, she grew more confident. "Remember," Daniel said during one of their practice sessions, "you have so much to offer. Your resilience, your determination. Those are valuable skills." Angela nodded, her eyes shining with a mix of gratitude and newfound self-belief. "I never thought of it that way before," she admitted. "I always felt like my past was just a burden." Daniel shook his head firmly. Your past is part of what makes you strong, Angela. It shaped you, but it doesn't define you. As they worked together, the bond between them deepened. Angela began to open up more about her hopes and fears for the future. Daniel listened attentively, offering support and gentle encouragement. One evening, as they sat reviewing Angela's resume, she paused and looked at Daniel. "Why are you doing all this for me?" she asked softly. Daniel's expression softened. "Because everyone deserves a chance, Angela, and because I believe in you." Thanks to Daniel's tireless efforts, Angela's children, Lily and Max, started attending a local elementary school. On their first day, Angela stood at the school gates, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and hope. Daniel stood beside her, offering silent support. "They'll be okay," he reassured her gently. "The school knows their situation and will take good care of them." Angela nodded, her eyes glistening with tears as she watched her children walk into the building. Lily, the older one, held Max's hand tightly, both looking small and scared in their new surroundings. Over the next few weeks, a remarkable change began to take place. Lily and Max, who had been quiet and withdrawn, slowly started to come out of their shells. Their teacher, Ms. Thompson, called Angela to share the good news. "Lily's made a best friend," Ms. Thompson said warmly, "and Max is always the first to volunteer for story time." Angela's heart swelled with joy. She shared the news with Daniel, who beamed with pride. "See, they're resilient, just like their mom," he said, giving her a gentle pat on the shoulder. One sunny afternoon, Angela waited outside the school, her face lit up with anticipation. As the bell rang, Lily and Max burst out of the doors, their faces wreathed in smiles. "Mom, Mom!" Lily called out, waving a colorful drawing. "Look what I made today!" Max tugged at Angela's sleeve, his eyes sparkling. "I got a gold star for my math, Mom." Angela knelt down, gathering her children in a tight hug. She looked up to see Daniel watching from a distance, a warm smile on his face. He had come to see how the kids were doing, and the sight of their happiness filled him with a deep sense of satisfaction. That evening, as Angela tucked her children into bed, she marveled at the change in them. Lily chattered excitedly about her new friends, while Max hugged his favorite stuffed animal, a gift from his new classmates. "I love school, Mom," Lily said sleepily. "Can we go again tomorrow?" Angela's heart overflowed with gratitude. She kissed her children goodnight and stepped out of their room, finding Daniel waiting in the hallway. "They're so happy," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I never thought I'd see them like this again." Daniel's eyes crinkled with warmth. "You made this happen, Angela. Your strength gave them this chance." Angela shook her head, tears of joy spilling down her cheeks. "We made this happen. I couldn't have done it without you, Daniel." As the weeks passed, Angela's confidence grew steadily. The job training program she had entered with trepidation became a source of pride and accomplishment. Each day, she absorbed new skills and knowledge, her mind awakening to possibilities she had long forgotten. One afternoon, as Angela sat in a computer class, her fingers flying across the keyboard, she felt a surge of excitement. The instructor had praised her work, calling it exceptional. For the first time in years, Angela allowed herself to dream of a future where she could stand on her own 2 feet. "I can do this," she whispered to herself, a small smile playing on her lips. "I can give my children the life they deserve." At home, Angela's newfound confidence spilled over into her interactions with Lily and Max. She helped them with their homework, her own recent learning experiences making her a patient and understanding teacher. The children thrived under their mother's renewed energy and optimism. Daniel watched Angela's transformation with a sense of awe and deep satisfaction. He had always believed in her strength, but seeing it blossom before his eyes was truly remarkable. One evening, as he drove home after checking in on Angela and the kids, a thought struck him. If Angela can turn her life around like this, how many others could do the same with the right support? He mused aloud. The question nagged at him, refusing to let go. Daniel began to look at his community with new ease. He noticed the homeless individuals he had once overlooked, the struggling single parents, the people who seem to have fallen through the cracks of society. Inspired by Angela's progress, Daniel started to research community outreach programs. He spent his free time volunteering at local shelters and speaking with social workers. The more he learned, the more he realized how much work there was to be done. "I want to make a real difference," Daniel confided in Angela one day. "Your story has opened my eyes to so much." Angela listened intently, her eyes shining with pride and gratitude. "You already have made a difference, Daniel. You changed our lives." Daniel nodded, a determined look on his face. "And now I want to help change more lives. I think I can use my position as a police officer to bridge the gap between law enforcement and vulnerable communities." As Angela continued to excel in her program, and Daniel explored ways to expand his impact, they both felt a sense of purpose and hope they hadn't experienced before. The future, once so bleak and uncertain, now held promise and potential. As Daniel immersed himself in community outreach, his perspective on his role as a police officer began to shift dramatically. The more time he spent with Angela and her children, and the more he learned about the struggles of the homeless and underprivileged, the more he realized that his badge could be used for so much more than just enforcing the law. One evening, after helping serve meals at a local shelter, Daniel sat in his patrol car, deep in thought. He watched as people from all walks of life entered and exited the shelter, each with their own story of hardship and hope. His mind wandered to Angela, remembering how close he had come to misjudging her based on appearances alone. "I could have made things so much worse for her," he muttered to himself, shaking his head. "How many others have I misunderstood? How many people have I failed to truly see?" These questions weighed heavily on Daniel's heart. He realized that his position as a cop gave him a unique opportunity to bridge the gap between law enforcement and vulnerable communities. He could be a voice for those who often went unheard, a protector for those who felt forgotten by society. With newfound determination, Daniel began to research ways he could make a bigger impact within the police force. He looked into specialized training programs focused on community policing and social work. He reached out to fellow officers who shared his passion for helping others, forming a small but dedicated group committed to changing the way they approached their duties. Daniel's superiors noticed the change in him. His reports became more detailed, focusing not just on crimes committed, but on the underlying social issues that often led to those crimes. He started proposing new initiatives like partnering with local shelters and social services to provide better support for the homeless and at-risk individuals they encountered on the job. As he delved deeper into this new approach to his career, Daniel felt a sense of purpose he had never experienced before. He realized that by dedicating himself to advocating for the homeless and underprivileged, he could make a real, lasting difference in his community. Daniel's newfound passion for community outreach quickly translated into action. He reached out to local charities and shelters, introducing himself not just as a police officer, but as someone who genuinely cared about making a difference. His first meeting was with the director of Hope Haven, the shelter that had taken in Angela and her children. "I want to do more," Daniel explained, his eyes shining with determination. "How can I help?" The director, a kind-faced woman named Sarah, smiled warmly. "Officer Harris, your interest alone means so much. We could use your help in so many ways." Together, they brainstormed ideas. Daniel realized his badge could open doors that had previously been closed to the shelter. He began reaching out to local businesses, advocating for job opportunities for shelter residents. His uniform lent credibility to the cause, and soon several companies agreed to participate in a job fair specifically for those trying to get back on their feet. Daniel didn't stop there. He used his connections within the police department to organize a donation drive. Desks that once collected dust in storage rooms were now filled with toiletries, warm clothes, and non-perishable food items for those in need. As word of Daniel's efforts spread, other officers began to take notice. Some were skeptical at first, but many were inspired by his dedication. Officer Jenny Martinez approached him one day after roll call. "Hey Harris," she said, a hint of admiration in her voice. "I heard about what you're doing with the shelters. Think I could help out sometime?" Daniel's face lit up. "Absolutely. The more, the merrier." Soon, Daniel had a small team of officers volunteering their off-duty hours to various community projects. They started a mentorship program, pairing at-risk youth with police officers who could provide guidance and support. The impact of these efforts didn't go unnoticed. Local news stations began covering their initiatives, shining a positive light on the relationship between law enforcement and the community. Daniel found himself being interviewed, using the platform to advocate for better resources and support for the homeless and underprivileged. Angela's heart raced as she turned the key to her new apartment. The door swung open, revealing a modest but clean living space that seemed like a palace compared to where she and her children had been just months ago. She stepped inside, her kids bouncing with excitement behind her. "Wow, Mommy, is this really ours?" her daughter squealed, her eyes wide with wonder. Angela nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "Yes, sweetie, this is our new home." Daniel stood in the doorway, a broad smile on his face as he watched the family explore their new surroundings. He carried a box of their belongings, one of the few they owned. "Need any help setting up?" he asked, his voice warm with pride. Angela turned to him, her eyes shining with gratitude. "Daniel, I can't thank you enough for everything you've done." He shook his head. "You did this, Angela. Your strength and determination got you here." As they unpacked, Angela couldn't help but marvel at how much her life had changed. The job training program had given her the skills and confidence she needed to secure a stable position at a local office. It wasn't glamorous work, but it provided a steady income and benefits, something she hadn't dared dream of just a few months ago. Daniel helped arrange furniture and hang a few pictures, transforming the bare apartment into a cozy home. The children ran from room to room, claiming spaces and imagining where their toys would go. "Look, Mommy," her son called out, pointing to the small balcony. "We can see the park from here." Angela joined him, wrapping her arm around his shoulders. The view wasn't spectacular, but it represented something far more valuable: hope for a brighter future. As the day wore on, the apartment began to feel like home. Daniel ordered pizza for everyone, and they sat on the floor of the living room, sharing their first meal in the new space. "To new beginnings," Daniel said, raising his slice in a toast. Angela smiled, feeling a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the food. "To new beginnings," she echoed, her voice filled with emotion. As the weeks passed, Angela watched her children blossom in their new environment. Every morning she walked them to school, her heart swelling with pride as they eagerly ran to join their classmates. The change in them was remarkable. Her daughter, once shy and withdrawn, now chattered excitedly about her new friends and favorite subjects. "Mom, guess what? I got an A on my math test," she exclaimed one afternoon, waving the paper in the air. Angela hugged her tight, tears of joy threatening to spill. "That's wonderful, sweetheart. I'm so proud of you." Her son, too, was thriving. He had joined the school's soccer team and spent hours practicing in the nearby park. Angela often sat on a bench watching him play with his newfound friends, marveling at the sound of his laughter echoing across the field. Daniel became a constant presence in their lives, dropping by regularly to check on them and offer support. One evening, he arrived with a bag full of school supplies and a couple of second-hand laptops for the kids. "Daniel, you shouldn't have," Angela protested, overwhelmed by his generosity. He shrugged, a warm smile on his face. "Every kid needs the right tools to succeed. It's the least I could do." The children squealed with delight, hugging Daniel tightly. Angela watched the scene, her heart full of gratitude. She never imagined they would have someone like Daniel in their lives, someone who cared so deeply and asked for nothing in return. As they sat around the dinner table that night, Angela looked at her children's bright faces and felt a deep sense of peace. They were safe, happy, and full of hope for the future. It was more than she had ever dared to dream of during those dark days on the streets. "Thank you," she whispered, looking up at the ceiling, grateful for the twist of fate that had brought Daniel into their lives and given them this second chance. Daniel's passion for advocacy grew with each passing day. His experiences with Angela and her family had opened his eyes to the struggles faced by many in his community, and he was determined to make a difference. As he continued his work, word of his efforts began to spread. One afternoon, Daniel received a call from the local community center. "Officer Harris," the director said, "we've heard about your work with the homeless and underprivileged. Would you be willing to speak at our upcoming town hall meeting?" Daniel felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. "Of course," he replied. "I'd be honored." On the night of the event, the community center was packed. Daniel stood at the podium, looking out at the sea of faces. He took a deep breath and began to speak, his voice filled with emotion. "A few months ago, I thought I knew what it meant to serve and protect," he started. "But then I met Angela and her children, and everything changed." As Daniel shared Angela's story, the room fell silent. He described her courage in fleeing an abusive relationship, the hardships she faced living on the streets, and her unwavering love for her children. He spoke of the transformation he witnessed when Angela received the support she needed. "Angela's story isn't unique," Daniel continued, his voice growing stronger. "There are countless others in our community facing similar struggles, but her story shows us what's possible when we come together to help those in need." His words resonated with the audience. Many were moved to tears, others nodded in agreement. Daniel could see the impact his speech was having. "We have the power to change lives," he said, his voice filled with conviction. "Every small act of kindness, every offer of support, can make a world of difference to someone who's struggling." As Daniel concluded his speech, the room erupted in applause. People approached him afterward, eager to learn how they could get involved. Local business owners offered to create job opportunities for those in need. Others volunteered to mentor at-risk youth or donate to shelters. Daniel's speech had ignited a spark in the community. His words, fueled by Angela's inspiring journey, had touched hearts and motivated action. As he left the community center that night, Daniel felt a renewed sense of purpose. He knew that this was just the beginning of a larger movement, one that could truly transform lives and bring hope to those who needed it most. Angela's life had taken a turn for the better, and she couldn't help but smile as she walked into her small but cozy apartment. The sound of her children's laughter filled the air, a stark contrast to the fear and silence that once dominated their lives. As she hung up her coat, Angela caught sight of a framed photo on the wall. It was a picture of her and her kids, taken at the local park just a few months ago. Their smiles were genuine, their eyes bright with hope. Angela's heart swelled with pride and gratitude. "Mom!" her daughter called out. "I got a star from my teacher." Angela hugged her daughter tightly. "That's wonderful, sweetheart. I'm so proud of you." Later that evening, as Angela prepared dinner, she thought about how much her life had changed. Her recent promotion at work had given her a sense of financial security she'd never known before. Her children were thriving in school, making friends and excelling in their studies. As she stirred the pot of soup on the stove, Angela's mind drifted to Daniel. His unwavering support had been the catalyst for all the positive changes in her life. She remembered how scared she'd been when he first found her in that abandoned building, and how his compassion had given her the courage to accept help. Angela felt a deep sense of gratitude wash over her. She knew she wouldn't be where she was today without Daniel's kindness and the support of the charity that had helped her get back on her feet. As she set the table for dinner, an idea began to form in Angela's mind. She thought about all the other women out there who might be in the same situation she had been in, scared, alone, and desperate to protect their children. "I want to give back," Angela whispered to herself. "I want to help others the way I was helped." The next day, Angela made a call to the charity that had supported her through her darkest times. She spoke with the volunteer coordinator, her voice filled with determination. "I'd like to volunteer," Angela said. "I want to help other women who are going through what I went through. Can you use me?" The coordinator's voice was warm and welcoming. "Angela, we'd be honored to have you. Your experience and strength could be incredibly inspiring to others." As Angela hung up the phone, she felt a sense of purpose she'd never experienced before. She was no longer just a survivor, she was becoming an advocate, ready to offer hope and support to others who were struggling. Daniel's passion for helping the homeless and underprivileged grew stronger with each passing day. His experiences with Angela and her family had opened his eyes to the real struggles many people faced in their community. He couldn't shake the feeling that he needed to do more. One chilly morning, Daniel walked into the police station with a determined look on his face. He headed straight for the chief's office, his mind racing with ideas. After a long discussion, he emerged with a smile. The chief had given him the green light to start a new community outreach program. Over the next few months, Daniel threw himself into his work. He partnered with local shelters, charities, and community leaders to create a network of support for those in need. His first initiative was a job training program specifically designed for homeless individuals, giving them the skills they needed to re-enter the workforce. As word spread about Daniel's efforts, more people in the community started to get involved. Local businesses offered internships and job opportunities to program graduates. Volunteers signed up in droves to help at shelters and food banks. The community was coming together in a way Daniel had never seen before. One of Daniel's proudest achievements was the creation of a safe house for women and children fleeing abusive situations. He thought of Angela and her kids, and how different their lives might have been if they had access to such a resource. The safe house provided not only shelter, but also counseling services and legal aid. As Daniel's programs grew and flourished, he noticed a shift in how the community perceived him. People no longer saw him as just another cop on the beat. They greeted him warmly on the streets, often stopping to share stories of how his initiatives had helped them or someone they knew. At a community meeting, an elderly woman stood up and addressed Daniel directly. "Officer Harris," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "I've lived in this town for 60 years, and I've never seen anyone make such a difference. You're not just enforcing the law, you're changing lives." Daniel felt a lump form in his throat. For the first time in years, he felt truly fulfilled in his career. He knew he was exactly where he was meant to be, doing what he was meant to do. The local newspaper's front page featured a striking headline, "From Homeless to Hope, One Woman's Journey." Angela's story, carefully crafted by a compassionate journalist, unfolded in the pages that followed. The article painted a vivid picture of Angela's struggles, her courage in fleeing an abusive relationship, and her determination to provide for her children despite overwhelming odds. As readers delved into Angela's journey, they couldn't help but be moved by her resilience. The article described how she had gone from sleeping in abandoned buildings to securing a stable job and a safe home for her family. Angela's words, quoted in the piece, were filled with gratitude and hope. The story also highlighted Daniel's role in Angela's transformation. It detailed how the dedicated police officer had gone above and beyond his duty, connecting Angela with vital resources and providing unwavering support throughout her journey. Daniel's compassion and commitment to making a difference in his community shone through in every paragraph. As the article circulated through the town, it struck a chord with readers. People who had never given much thought to the struggles of the homeless found themselves deeply moved by Angela's story. The community buzzed with discussions about homelessness, domestic abuse, and the power of second chances. The impact of the article was immediate and profound. The local charity that had helped Angela saw a significant increase in donations. People called and emailed, asking how they could contribute to support others in similar situations. The charity's volunteer coordinator was overwhelmed with inquiries from community members eager to lend a hand. Local businesses, inspired by Angela's success story, reached out to the charity to offer job opportunities for program participants. A real estate agent offered to help find affordable housing for families in need. Even the local school board discussed implementing programs to better support children from disadvantaged backgrounds. Angela's story had sparked a wave of compassion and action throughout the community. People who had once walked past homeless individuals without a second glance now stopped to offer kind words or assistance. The town's atmosphere had shifted, becoming more empathetic and united in its desire to help those in need. The city hall was abuzz with excitement as community leaders, local officials, and residents gathered for the annual Civic Awards ceremony. The grand room was adorned with banners and flowers, creating a festive atmosphere that matched the spirit of the occasion. Daniel Harris stood nervously at the back of the room, adjusting his tie for the 100th time. He felt out of place in his freshly pressed suit, more accustomed to his police uniform. As he scanned the crowd, his eyes landed on a familiar face. Angela Walker sat in the front row, her children beside her, all beaming with pride. The mayor stepped up to the podium, her voice ringing out clear and strong. Our next award goes to an individual who has gone above and beyond in service to our community. Officer Daniel Harris has shown us what it truly means to protect and serve. As Daniel made his way to the stage, a thunderous applause filled the room. He shook the mayor's hand and accepted the gleaming plaque, his hands trembling slightly. Standing before the microphone, he took a deep breath and looked out at the sea of faces. "I'm deeply honored by this recognition," Daniel began, his voice thick with emotion. "But the truth is, I don't deserve this award. The real heroes are the people I've had the privilege to help and support." His gaze found Angela in the crowd and he smiled warmly. "I'd like to dedicate this award to Angela Walker and her children. Their strength, resilience, and unwavering spirit in the face of adversity have been a constant inspiration to me." Angela's eyes welled up with tears as Daniel continued. "They've taught me more about courage and determination than I could ever hope to learn in a lifetime of police work. It's because of people like Angela that I'm motivated to do what I do every day." Daniel's words resonated through the hall, touching the hearts of everyone present. He spoke of the importance of community, compassion, and second chances. As he concluded his speech, the audience rose to their feet, applauding with renewed vigor. Stepping down from the stage, Daniel was immediately enveloped in a warm hug from Angela and her children. The family he had once misjudged had become an integral part of his life, a constant reminder of why his work mattered. As the weeks turned into months, Angela Walker's life continued to flourish. Her confidence grew with each passing day, and she carried herself with a newfound sense of purpose. The woman who had once been afraid to ask for help was now a beacon of hope for others facing similar struggles. Every Saturday morning, Angela volunteered at the local women's shelter. She shared her story with those who needed it most, offering a listening ear and a shoulder to cry on. Her words carried weight, for she had walked in their shoes and come out stronger on the other side. "You're not alone," she would often say, her eyes filled with compassion. "If I could make it through, so can you." Daniel Harris remained a constant presence in Angela's life. Their friendship had deepened over time, built on a foundation of mutual respect and shared values. They often worked side by side at community events, their easy camaraderie evident to all who saw them. One sunny afternoon, Daniel stopped by Angela's apartment. Her children, now thriving in school and extracurricular activities, greeted him with excited hugs. "Uncle Daniel!" they cried in unison. Their faces lit up with joy. Angela watched from the kitchen, her heart swelling with gratitude. Daniel had become more than just a friend. He was family. He played catch with her son in the backyard, helped her daughter with her math homework, and always had time for a bedtime story. As they sat on the porch later that evening, watching the sun dip below the horizon, Angela turned to Daniel. "You know," she said softly, "I never thought I'd have this kind of life again. A home, a job, my kids happy and safe, and a friend like you." Daniel smiled, his eyes twinkling. "I'm the lucky one, Angela. You and the kids have brought so much joy into my life. I can't imagine not having you all in it." Their bond, forged through adversity and strengthened by shared purpose, continued to grow. Together, they were making a difference in their community, one life at a time. The sun shone brightly on a beautiful Saturday morning as the community gathered in the local park for a festive event. Colorful banners fluttered in the gentle breeze, and the air was filled with the sounds of laughter and cheerful conversation. Angela Walker stood near a picnic table, her face beaming with joy as she watched her children play with their new friends. Her son was engaged in an enthusiastic game of tag, while her daughter sat on a blanket nearby, sharing a book with another little girl. The sight filled Angela's heart with warmth and gratitude. As she looked around, Angela saw familiar faces from the shelter, the job training program, and the various community initiatives she had become involved with. These people, once strangers, were now an integral part of her support system. They chatted and laughed together, sharing stories and plans for the future. A short distance away, Daniel Harris leaned against a tree, observing the scene before him. His eyes were drawn to Angela and her children, and a smile played on his lips. The transformation he had witnessed in their lives over the past months filled him with an overwhelming sense of peace and purpose. Daniel watched as Angela's son scored a point in the game, jumping up and down with excitement. His sister cheered from her spot on the blanket, clapping her hands enthusiastically. Angela caught her children's eyes and gave them a proud thumbs up, her face radiating happiness. As he stood there taking in the joyful atmosphere, Daniel felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over him. The journey that had begun with suspicion and misunderstanding had led to this beautiful moment of community and connection. He knew deep in his heart that this experience had changed him forever. The laughter of Angela and her children echoed across the park, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the power of compassion and support. Daniel's heart swelled with emotion as he realized the true impact of the difference he had made in their lives. The autumn sun cast a warm glow over the community center as Daniel and Angela stood side by side, watching the charity event they had organized unfold before them. The large hall buzzed with activity, filled with volunteers, donors, and families in need. Colorful banners hung from the walls proclaiming "Hope for the Homeless" in bold letters. Daniel's eyes swept across the room, taking in the scene with a sense of pride and amazement. Tables lined the walls, offering everything from warm clothing and toiletries to job application assistance and health screenings. The air was filled with the hum of conversation and occasional bursts of laughter. Angela's children darted between the tables, helping to distribute flyers and guide newcomers. Their faces beamed with enthusiasm, a far cry from the frightened, withdrawn children Daniel had first encountered months ago. As Daniel watched a young mother receive a care package, tears of gratitude in her eyes, he felt a lump form in his throat. The realization of how far they had come and the impact they were making hit him with full force. Angela noticed Daniel's emotional reaction and placed a gentle hand on his arm. "Can you believe it?" she said softly, her voice filled with wonder. "Look at all these people coming together to help. And it all started with you, Daniel." Daniel turned to Angela, his eyes shining. "No, it started with you," he replied. "Your strength and courage inspired all of this. I just helped point it in the right direction." Angela smiled, her eyes misting over. "Thank you, Daniel, for everything. You didn't just save me and my children. You've given hope to so many others." As they stood there watching the event unfold, Daniel felt a deep sense of fulfillment wash over him. The journey that had begun with suspicion and misunderstanding had led to this moment of community and compassion. He knew without a doubt that his life had been forever changed for the better. If you enjoyed the story of Officer Daniel and Angela, I handpicked this next story that will touch your heart. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.